Hey guys, it's James Winstead here, otherwise known as Wamsy, here with a new 3D tutorial over rolling loops. I tried out a couple new things in this tutorial, have some real life footage of my fingers and some simulator footage. Also drew up some diagrams to help explain the maneuvers better, so how about we go look at those first and then we'll look at some flying video. Let's first talk about the stick inputs needed to do a rolling loop. They're exactly like a normal rolling Harrier, except you're using more power and you're not steering the airplane to the left or right, but you're actually using your stick inputs to push the nose of the airplane up or down, depending on how you do your loop. Now, there's a certain parts of a loop that are harder than the other. When you're going from sections 2 to 3, you have to keep in mind that you want the nose of the airplane to push over to go down. That's where a lot of people have trouble, and that's where I definitely recommend practicing. Also, section 4 is another hard part of a rolling loop. At this point, you should be shooting to finish exactly where you started, so you want to manage your inputs and your power setting to make sure you go back to that original starting point and not fly under it or above it. This is definitely the hardest part of the loop also, because if you make a mistake, your airplane is going to be going right at the ground. So when you're practicing this last part, you should definitely have some altitude. Also, I recommend learning a rolling loop in two different halves, the first half and the second half. The first half is definitely the easiest part, and the last half is where most of the troubles come in. So when watching the real flight footage that I'm about to show you, please pay attention to the last half of the loop. Now, the other thing you have to remember is that this is going to take a lot of time, and before you should even attempt a rolling loop, you should have mastered the rolling Harrier, how to steer both directions, and how to manage altitude. Now let's take a look at our first clip of a rolling loop. As you can tell, the stick movements are very quick, so let's add some slow motion to really see exactly what's going on during a rolling loop. Here's the slow motion view of the rolling loop. The tail movements are all given so that the nose of the airplane is going upwards. They're not delayed to the left or to the right to point the nose in that direction. Now, the hardest part is when you get to the top of the loop. While the steering motion is still going to be the same, the nose of the airplane is going to be going up and over, so now that the nose is going down, while really you haven't changed your stick inputs at all. Now we're going on the bottom half of the loop, where you have to manage your power and your inputs correctly so that you come out at about the same height that you entered from. This is one of the critical parts of a rolling loop, and always make sure that people understand this particular section. Also, this is where a lot of things can go wrong, and it's definitely the hardest part of the loop. So I recommend that if you're getting out of whack, fly out and don't try and finish the loop, or you might put your airplane into the ground. To better see the stick inputs that I'm giving, here's a clip from a simulator that shows a rolling loop. Keep in mind that the simulator is not near as accurate as what input should be giving, so more power might have to be given, as the airplanes don't like to fly through that slow. Now let's take a look and slow it down. Here's a view from the simulator. We get on the power and start our roll, and make sure our tail movements are pushing the nose of the airplane upwards so we get to the top of our loop. While the steering motion is the same, it will start to push the nose of the airplane down as we get off the power and we give our inputs to correctly fly out at the same altitude that we left. In this clip, you'll notice I drifted a little bit to the right, which means that my inputs were not only putting the nose of the airplane upwards, we were also slightly drifting to the right, which is something you want to avoid when doing the real thing. Here's a rolling loop from the Mode 1 perspective. It's the same thing. You're getting on the power, working your way up with the tail inputs pushing the nose of the airplane up and over the top, and when you get to the top, you start transitioning while going down and getting off the power and working the inputs to fly out at around the same altitude that you entered. Now that we've gone over rolling loops, let's take a look at some different types of rolling loops and different ways to do it. In this first clip, I've used more power and much larger stick inputs all the way around to tighten the loop. Now let's take a look at that same clip with some slow motion added. When I'm doing this loop, the power setting is at almost full throttle the whole time, and my stick inputs are much greater than a normal loop where I'm trying to, expand the loop. But here I'm trying to go all the way around the circle much faster and much quicker. In this example, when we get to the top of the loop, we're going to quickly push the nose over and then finish our loop in a much shorter distance. I've seen these types of loops done in competition flying, so I thought I would include how to do them. Now let's take a look at that clip in slow motion also. For this loop, I'm not on the power as much until I get to the very top of the loop. My inputs are also a little bit smaller, but when I get to the top of the loop, I get on the power and give a big down elevator input to get the nose to come right back around. This is a really cool maneuver, and when done really low can yield some awesome results. In our next clips, we're going to be taking a look at rolling loops while going to the left. Rolling to the left is a lot more difficult for me, as normally I prefer to roll to the right during all maneuvers. So as you can see that my left rolling loops are not near as nice as my right rolling loops. But let's take a look at them anyway so you can see exactly how to do a left rolling loop. Now let's add some slow motion to the previous clip. Here's a rolling loop going to the left. As usual, we're getting on the power and starting our stirring motion to drive the nose of the airplane to the top of the loop. Once we get to the top of the loop, we're going to continue that stirring motion all the way back to where we entered. As you can see, right about here, I also went a little bit to the right, and now I'm counter-correcting on the way down, which is something you will definitely need to get accustomed to in learning rolling loops. As well, just giving your inputs to get the nose of the airplane going up are not going to be enough. Those minor and minute corrections going from the left and to the right is what's going to make or break a perfect rolling loop. Here's a left rolling loop on the simulator to help see the stick inputs better. Now let's watch it in slow motion along with a mode 1 view of a rolling loop to the left. On this rolling loop is going to be exactly like the same. We're going to get on the power and start our inputs to drive the nose of the airplane to the crest of the loop. Once we're at the top of the loop, we're going to continue that stick input, which in turn is going to push the nose down and try to fly out at around the same altitude we entered. In this loop, I flew out lower, which means I probably should have gotten off the power or given larger stick inputs to make sure that the nose was coming up. Here's our last view of a rolling loop, a left rolling loop in mode 1. Like with all of our loops, we're going to start off by getting on the power and starting our inputs to drive the nose of the airplane to the top. Keep in mind that when you're doing these inputs, not only do you want to focus on driving the nose of the airplane up, we also want to make sure that the timing is right so we're not veering off to the left or to the right. When we come back around, we try and exit the same altitude that we entered in. And there you go. You now have a much better understanding of how to do a rolling loop. Since the rolling Harrier stirring motion is so critical to a rolling loop, make sure you have that stirring motion down, along with knowing exactly what you're doing and why you're doing that stirring motion. What I would also recommend is to pick an input that allows you to guide the plane better. For me, my down elevator input is the critical input that I base my whole stirring motion off of. Normally when I'm giving my inputs, I start my stirring motion with a down elevator input, or at least I try to. From there, I'm normally able to get my timing in the perfect place to allow to do a loop and stay on timing and not drift to the left or right. Normally when I get out of whack, I try to find my center point using that down elevator input. That's all the advice I have for rolling loops, and I hope you enjoy this video and I hope you learn something from it. If you have any more questions, let me know in the comments and I can definitely try to answer them. Hope you guys have a good time learning and don't break any airplanes.